Now, by the 1970s, that was, fiscal policy really dominated economic stabilization policy, not only in the United States, but in Europe and in other Western democracies from the early part of the 20th century down to about the 1970s. Okay? So many decades, governments, the United States government, Great Britain, France, Germany, most Western countries relied heavily on fiscal policy to stabilize the economy. It seemed to work. Okay? But then along come the 1970s, which I've told you previously was a miserable period in many ways, certainly from an economic standpoint. In fact, it was so bad, so unusual, that for the first time, economists observed two phenomena occurring simultaneously that they had previously believed were opposite sides of a coin. Because during the 1970s, not only was there high inflation, but there also was high unemployment, an indication of recession. So we had inflationary pressure in the economy, we had recessionary pressure in the economy occurring at the same time. And they had to invent an entirely new term to describe that. They called it stagflation. Okay? And a whole new school of economic thought emerged as a result, called the monetarist school. The monetarists, led by the eminent economist Milton Friedman out of the University of Chicago, argued that this stagflation that we had not only in the United States but in other Western countries, this high inflation and high unemployment that we're observing simultaneously, is in large part the result of fiscal policy. Okay? They were critics of fiscal policy. They argued, the monetarists argued, that fiscal policy just cannot work as a tool of economic stabilization. In fact, it may be that it makes things worse. Okay? The 1970s, from their perspective, the 1970s, the economic conditions of the 1970s were the proof in the pudding, as they say. Okay? Now, there were a number of points on which the monetarist criticized fiscal policy. Okay? And I have several things listed here for you on the screen, but I'm only going to focus on the first two. We won't, in the interest of time, we won't get into this stuff about the Ricardian equivalence theorem and the crowding out effect. Although we should. I wish we had time, but we'll have to leave it just with these first 2 points. Okay? So one very important criticism that the monetarists made of fiscal policy. What is fiscal policy?
Decisions by taxing and spending by the President and Congress.
Very good. Government's pattern of taxing and spending as a tool of economic stabilization. And you're right, absolutely important to remember that fiscal policy decisions are made by the President and Congress in the legislative process. And so one of the very important criticisms that the monetarists made was that fiscal policy just cannot work because taxing and spending decisions are made by politicians. It's too political. And you can't expect politicians to exercise the kind of fiscal discipline that would be necessary to make fiscal policy work. And if we got into this last time, and I'm repeating myself a little bit here, I apologize, but I think it's okay. It's worth saying again. Okay? Here's the problem, according to the monetarists. It's not so difficult on the recession side for politicians to do what fiscal policy would have them do. Okay? Imagine that the economy is in recession. Okay? Unemployment is high. People who still have jobs are worried about losing their jobs. Okay? And I'm your representative in Congress, and we have a town hall meeting, and I come to you and I say, I know times are tough. We understand in Washington that times are tough. You're worried about losing your job. And so here's what we're going to do to help out. We're going to give you a tax cut. We're going to lower your taxes. And you all cheer wildly. Can't wait. Wow, when can we vote for you again? Okay. That's no problem making that political decision. Okay? Oh, by the way, I'm not done. Not only are we going to give you a tax cut, but we're going to stimulate the local economy and the national economy by appropriating money for a project in this district, a government project that will put lots of people to work, and they'll be able to go into grocery stores and department stores and so on, and buy. It'll have a multiplier effect stimulating the economy. Okay? And you all, wow, I'll vote for you twice if I can. All right? That's not hard to do on the recession side. What's difficult is the inflation side. And remember, that was the major problem in the 1970s. Okay, we're in a period of inflation, and I come to you in this town hall meeting as your representative in Congress and say, no, times are tough, you're feeling the pinch, prices are out of control, the price of everything is going up, gasoline's going up, food's going up, housing's going up, whatever else you have to pay, on a month-to-month basis, the price of everything is going up. You know what else is going up? Your taxes. Because fiscal policy says that in order to take money out of the economy, government has to raise your taxes. Sorry to tell you, at the very time you don't want to hear it because of the price of everything, but we got to raise your taxes. That's not politically saleable. That doesn't get me a lot of votes in the next election. Oh, and by the way, that government project that we've had here in this district, we've got to cut funding for that program because fiscal policy says that government has to cut back on its own spending. That's also not very politically saleable. Okay? And so that's exactly what the monetarists are saying. You can't expect politicians to exercise the kind of fiscal discipline that would be necessary to make this work, particularly on the inflation side. And that's why they believed in the 1970s that inflation was such a persistent problem, that politicians just would not make the hard choices that would be necessary to make fiscal policy work. Now, the second thing is really by itself a problem, but when you couple it with the political thing, it becomes a real problem. That is, the monetarists argue that fiscal policy is too slow. You have all these lags associated with fiscal policy. The first of which is the recognition lag. Let's back up here for a second. Okay, you'll recall we said that, let's say, for example, that we're in a period of recession. Okay, here we're right here. Okay, we're in this period of recession. It takes some time for economists and others just to recognize that we're moving into a period of recession. Actually, it's a little bit easier on the recession side than it is on the inflation side, believe it or not, because economists have some pretty definitive indicators of recession, 2 or more quarters of no growth or contraction of the economy. But still fairly difficult to get, agreement on the indicators. So it's what we call a recognition lag, okay? And then there is a decision-making lag. As you'll recall, the decisions about taxing and spending have to be made by the President and Congress in the legislative process, and it takes some time for the President and Congress to get together on what the appropriate fiscal policy response should be. Maybe the President favors a tax cut, maybe Congress favors increased spending, maybe they come to some agreement, maybe they don't. Maybe they never come to any agreement. But assuming that they do, it just takes some time to work the legislative process. Remember the discussion that we had a couple of weeks ago about the legislative process in Congress and how difficult it is, how problematic it is, all the veto points that we talked about. Okay? So this is no different. Economic policy decisions, fiscal policy decisions are made in that process. And so it can be very difficult and very slow for that to happen. Assuming that the President and Congress get together and you actually get legislation, then there's the administrative lag. It takes some time. Let's say we're going to get a tax cut, okay, like George W. Bush did in 2008. And, it takes some time. The administrative lag means that it takes some time for the IRS to process all of those checks and send all those checks out. If it's a spending program, it's going to take even longer. If the government's going to spend money on roads and bridges and so on with the idea of stimulating the economy, it's going to take some time to negotiate the contracts with the firms that are going to pour the cement, right, and all that sort of stuff. Okay, but assuming you get all that done, then you have an operational lag. And that means that once all the new money is out there in the economy, whether it's the result of a tax cut or whether it's the result of increased government spending, it takes some time to realize the effects. It just takes some time for the economic effects to kick in. So what the monetarists argue is that, okay, by the time all these, let's say we're here, okay, by the time all these lags kick in, what's already happening? The economy is already correcting itself. It's already coming out of the recession. And now you've got all this new money out there in the economy that wouldn't be there without the fiscal policy, which does what? It exacerbates the upcoming inflationary cycle. Right? It makes the coming inflation even worse than it would be.